My name is Catherine Morrison, and I'm about to tell you a story about family loyalty, betrayal, and the price of ambition in Manhattan's most ruthless circles. My twin sister Victoria always believed she was the golden child, the one our family could never forget. So when she vanished for 4 years, she thought she could waltz back in and put me, her so-called replacement, firmly in my place. But she forgot one crucial thing about the Morrison family. We only value money, never sentiment. The moment she chose to play dead, her game was already over. The Morrison family was hosting my birthday celebration, which also served as my engagement party to Alexander Sterling, in the penthouse ballroom of our flagship property, the Morrison Grand Hotel on Fifth Avenue. From these heights, one could gaze out over the entirety of Central Park, and as evening descended, the city's lights twinkled like scattered stars across the darkening landscape. Crystal chandeliers cast warm golden light throughout the space, illuminating champagne towers that sparkled like diamonds under their glow. Guests dressed in custom evening wear moved gracefully through the room, elegant figures weaving between conversations. Every person present represented the cream of New York high society. Wall Street titans, political power brokers, charity board members, each drawn by the significance of uniting two of the city's most influential dynasties, the Morrisons and the Sterlings. My father, Robert Morrison, and mother, Eleanor Morrison, circulated through the crowd with champagne glasses in hand, wearing those perfectly practiced smiles that came so naturally after decades in society circles. As founder of Morrison Industrial Group, father had spent more than 30 years clawing his way up in the business world, transforming what began as a modest manufacturing operation into a commercial empire spanning energy, real estate, and finance. Mother hailed from one of Boston's oldest aristocratic families, and her natural grace and social acumen had secured the Morrison name an unshakable position among New York's elite circles. They were thoroughly pleased with me, their second daughter, unlike my lovesick sister Victoria. For the sake of what she called true love, she had been willing to abandon her studies at Harvard Business School, cast aside the family's expectations, and even leave behind her fiancé to play some ridiculous romantic disappearing act. 4 years earlier, Victoria had left behind a heartbreakingly beautiful farewell letter. In it, she claimed to have contracted a rare blood disorder and said the doctors had given her no more than 6 months to live. She refused to become a burden to anyone, especially to Alexander, the man she claimed to love so deeply, so she had chosen to face her final days alone. The letter concluded with these words: "Please remember me as I was at my most beautiful, not as someone ravaged by illness." Then she simply vanished without a trace. Private investigators searched for an entire year without finding a single clue, and even our contacts in federal law enforcement proved unable to help. Everyone believed her story completely. A beautiful young woman of 22 who, for the sake of love and dignity, had chosen to face death in solitude. Alexander spent a full year in complete despair over her loss. This man, typically so cold and calculating in business matters, would drink himself into oblivion during late nights, clutching photographs of Victoria while tears streamed down his face. He canceled all business engagements and locked himself away in his Wall Street office at Sterling Group headquarters, moving through his days like a man already dead. Sterling family stock prices plummeted 15% during this period, and the board of directors seriously considered asking his father to resume active leadership of the company. My parents aged years in what seemed like months. Mother began making frequent visits to psychiatrists, while father threw himself into charitable endeavors with desperate intensity, as though such good works might somehow benefit his departed eldest daughter in whatever realm she now inhabited. The Morrison family even established an educational foundation in Victoria's memory, dedicated to supporting young scholars afflicted with rare diseases. Only I knew the truth. Victoria suffered from no blood disorder whatsoever. She had simply run away with her impoverished artist boyfriend, David Chen. David was a struggling Chinese-American artist who rented a shabby studio space in Brooklyn, admittedly quite handsome in that brooding, poetic way that some women find irresistible. Victoria had met him during her art history studies at Columbia University and had promptly fallen head over heels into what she considered pure, true love. She had even left me a secret letter, practically gloating about her brilliant plan. She explained that she was using her supposed death to carve an indelible mark on Alexander's heart, ensuring she would forever remain his perfect, untouchable ideal. When she returned after a few years, she was certain Alexander would be overjoyed, and everyone would be moved to tears by this miraculous story of love conquering even death itself. And I, Catherine Morrison, the shadow who had lived in her light, the pitiful substitute, would surely be cast aside without mercy. She would reclaim her position in the spotlight and become the most envied woman in New York society, the Morrison family heiress who had returned from the dead, the beloved of the Sterling Group heir. I had read that letter in my office and fed it directly into the paper shredder, watching those letters transform into tiny fragments under the mechanical blades. Naive, foolish. I struggled to find adequate words to describe my twin sister's mentality. She completely failed to understand that in families like ours, love represents the most worthless commodity imaginable. Marriage alliances are strategic partnerships, mergers between commercial empires that produce satisfying numbers on combined financial statements. Such unions are not about romance or sentiment, but about market share, board control, tax optimization, and cross-industry resource integration. Alexander needed not some whimsical, idealistic princess, but a capable partner who could help solidify his position within Sterling Group while creating long-term value for both families. Though the Sterling dynasty was deeply rooted in traditional finance, they lacked experience and connections in emerging clean energy sectors. Morrison Group, however, possessed extensive expertise in both traditional industry and renewable energy technologies, precisely what the Sterling family required. And I, Catherine Morrison, was perfectly positioned to serve as the bridge connecting these two empires. During these 4 years, I had assumed responsibility for everything Victoria had abandoned, using concrete business achievements to repair the reputational damage her selfishness had inflicted on our family. I applied everything I had learned at Harvard Business School, assisting father in expanding into 3 new market sectors, successfully completing 2 major acquisition deals, and leading Morrison Group's strategic transition toward clean energy initiatives. I had proven through my own capabilities that the Morrison family was not merely unaffected by Victoria's absence, but actually stronger without her destructive influence. Kate, what are you thinking about? Alexander's voice came from beside me as he naturally placed his arm around my waist, offering me a glass of room-temperature water. He knew I avoided alcohol at formal events because I needed to maintain absolute mental clarity for handling any unexpected situations that might arise. I smiled at him. I was considering whether we should adjust our strategy for the offshore wind power project presentation at next month's Energy Summit in Houston. A glimmer of appreciation flashed in Alexander's eyes. He appreciated working with intelligent women and enjoyed our business chemistry. Always business strategy with you, he said with a slight pause, his tone growing somewhat complex. 4 years ago, Tori stood at a party just like this one, telling me she wanted freedom, wanted to pursue what she called pure love. Here we went again. Throughout these 4 years, he would occasionally mention Victoria, not out of lingering love, but from some form of survivor's guilt. He believed he bore responsibility for Victoria's supposed death, and this guilt had nearly destroyed him during that first year. Though he had eventually resumed normal business activities, the psychological shadow remained. I had no interest in exposing his self-indulgent emotional games, so I simply replied coolly, "People have different goals in life." My sister pursued romance and sentiment, while I focused solely on sustainable value creation. Alexander studied my face, identical to Victoria's, yet our expressions and attitudes were completely different. Victoria had embodied the typical American sweetheart archetype: innocent, charming, constantly appearing vulnerable and in need of protection. I was more like a carefully cultivated rose, beautiful, independent, thorned, equally capable of commanding respect in boardrooms and maintaining grace at charity galas. He finally sighed and gripped my hand tighter. "Thank goodness for you, Kate." Yes, thank goodness for me, indeed. At that precise moment, the massive oak doors of the ballroom were suddenly pushed open from outside. Instantly, photographers' flashbulbs converged on the doorway, and all 200 guests turned their heads toward the entrance. A woman wearing a simple white Chanel dress stood framed in the doorway. She had chestnut-colored hair and very pale skin, yet this did nothing to diminish her stunning beauty. She slowly surveyed the entire ballroom before finally fixing her gaze on Alexander beside me. Then tears began sliding down her delicate cheekbones, and her voice, neither too loud nor too soft, carried clearly throughout the hall. "Alex, I've come home." The entire ballroom fell silent as death itself. I watched as my parents' social smiles froze instantly, mother nearly dropping her champagne glass. I observed the shock, confusion, and voyeuristic excitement spreading across our guests' faces. The Wall Street bankers were already calculating in their heads how this sudden development might affect both families' stock prices, while the society ladies were thrilled to be witnessing what would surely become tomorrow's most explosive gossip. I saw Alexander standing frozen, as though struck by lightning, staring at the woman in the doorway with trembling lips, unable to produce a single sound. And I simply observed my dear sister, Victoria Morrison, with perfect composure. She had finally returned. After 4 years, she had finished performing her self-directed Shakespearean tragedy and was ready to collect the fruits of what she assumed would be her victory. Her gaze moved past Alexander to meet mine with unmistakable challenge, as though saying, "See, Catherine, I'm back. Your time as understudy is over. Now it's time for the real star to reclaim center stage." I lifted the glass of water Alexander had given me earlier and took a small sip. The temperature was perfect. "What a pity, dear sister. You thought this was some Hollywood movie set, but this is the real world of Wall Street power games. From the moment you chose to play dead, you had already lost completely." Everyone stood shocked into speechlessness by this sudden dramatic scene, and the atmosphere in the ballroom became unbearably awkward. Several veteran society columnists had already discreetly pulled out their phones to document what they knew would be next year's most sensational story for Vanity Fair. Victoria was clearly satisfied with this theatrical effect. She lifted her skirt and walked toward us in her Jimmy Choo heels, moving very slowly, like an angel descended from heaven, every step calculated for maximum dramatic impact. Tears continued streaming from her beautiful green eyes, sliding down that still perfect face and landing precisely on the white fabric at her chest, spreading into small, dark flowers. Truly a magnificent performance, I thought to myself. The Academy truly owed her a golden statue. "Alex!" She finally reached us, stopping directly in front of Alexander and extending a trembling hand as though to touch his cheek. Alexander instinctively stepped back half a pace, causing his arm around my waist to tighten. This subtle body language was captured by every person present. Victoria's hand froze in midair, her carefully constructed expression of sorrow instantly solidifying before transforming into deep hurt and disbelief. "You're avoiding me?" she said in a voice thick with tears that carried throughout the entire ballroom. Alexander's throat visibly moved as he finally found his voice, though it sounded dry and hoarse. "Tori, I thought you were already—" "I'm not dead," Victoria interrupted passionately, tears flowing even more freely. "I had a very serious blood disease, and I was afraid of becoming a burden to all of you, so I said those things. These past 4 years, I've been receiving treatment in Switzerland alone, enduring countless chemotherapy sessions and bone marrow procedures. I missed you so much, Alex. I thought about you every day and every night." This tearful monologue caused murmurs to ripple through the surrounding guests. "My God, so the Morrison family's eldest daughter isn't dead? What's going on? What kind of drama is this? Rising from the dead? So, who is this one? The twin sister? This is like a real-life replacement story. What's the Sterling boy going to do now? This should be quite a show." I could feel Father's face darkening like a thundercloud, while Mother was digging her nails into her palms, struggling to maintain the last shreds of her dignity. In New York's upper-class society, public humiliation was far more devastating than business failure. Alexander's expression could have been included in a psychology textbook, with shock, guilt, and confusion warring across his typically cold and composed features. He looked at Victoria, then down at me, like a man faced with an impossible choice. Victoria finally turned her full attention to me, her eyes filled with condescending pity. "Kate, I know these 4 years have been difficult for you," she said in a gracious tone, as though she were a generous queen addressing a loyal servant. "Thank you for taking care of Alex and helping with the family business. Now that I'm back, you can return everything to me." Return everything to her? I nearly laughed out loud. What did she think this was? Some toy she had carelessly discarded that she could pick up whenever she pleased? Before I could respond, Mother stepped forward first. Rather than looking at Victoria, she linked her arm through mine and addressed the surrounding guests with a perfectly rehearsed, social smile. "Ladies and gentlemen, please excuse this disruption. This is my elder daughter, Victoria, who wasn't mature enough years ago and played a terrible joke on the family. She ran away from home for 4 years, in a fit of childishness, and now that she's realized her mistake, she's decided to return." With a single sentence, Mother had transformed Victoria's supposed tragic sacrifice into an immature runaway story. This was Eleanor Morrison's skill on the social battlefield, deflecting family embarrassment into a tale of youthful growth and learning. The distinction was immediately clear to everyone present. Victoria's face flushed crimson with embarrassment. "Mom, I was sick because—" "Enough!" Father's low, authoritative voice cut through her protest as he strode over to stand beside Mother, his gaze slicing through Victoria like a blade. "Haven't you embarrassed the Morrison family enough? You've destroyed our reputation." As a veteran of 30 years in the business world, Robert Morrison would never give this runaway daughter any face-saving measures in a public setting. This was the Morrison family principle. Family honor superseded personal emotions. Victoria trembled under Father's harsh tone, looking tearfully toward Alexander for protection. She remained exactly as she had always been. Whenever trouble arose, she would hide behind a man seeking shelter. Alexander's brow furrowed deeply. He opened his mouth as though to defend Victoria, but ultimately said nothing. What could he say? Comfort Victoria? That would mean publicly slapping both me and our families in the face. Criticize Victoria? His ridiculous guilt complex wouldn't allow such action. So he remained silent, and his silence was the answer I needed. I finally lifted my eyes to meet my twin sister's gaze directly. "Sister," I said, my voice calm and clear, "welcome home." My composure seemed more difficult for her to accept than our parents' anger. She stared at me wide-eyed. "Catherine, you—" "However, there's something you seem confused about." I calmly interrupted her, offering a slight smile. "You mentioned wanting me to return everything to you, but anything that belonged to you legally ceased to exist the moment you left that farewell letter 4 years ago." I raised my hand clasped with Alexander's, and he instinctively tightened his grip, his palm warm and steady. "For instance, the position as the Sterling family heir's fiancé now legally belongs to me, as does the succession rights to Morrison Group." My voice remained soft, but each word struck Victoria like a precision missile. Her face changed from red to white to green, her lips trembling speechlessly. She had probably never imagined that her carefully planned, triumphant return would open with such rejection and such a brutal reality check. I watched her swaying as though about to collapse, feeling not a shred of sympathy. She had chosen her own path. Adults must always pay the price for their foolishness, and her bill was just beginning to come due. The party naturally could not continue. My parents, citing a family emergency, hurriedly ended this public drama and politely saw off all the guests. I could hear their whispered conversations as they departed, knowing that tomorrow this explosive news would spread throughout Manhattan's social circles. Alexander's parents also looked displeased. Before leaving, Mr. Sterling gave me a meaningful look and said, "Kate, the Sterling and Morrison families have great confidence in our partnership with you." These words were meant for me, but also for Alexander, who still seemed to be processing the situation. Though the Sterling family wielded considerable power in finance, they needed stable and profitable business alliances, not unpredictable emotional drama. Alexander ultimately left with his parents. Before departing, he gave Victoria one deep, complicated look, but said nothing in her defense. When forced to choose between business and emotion, he had chosen the former. The vast ballroom soon contained only our family. Actually, perhaps now it should be described as 3 people plus one uninvited guest. The crystal chandeliers still sparkled brilliantly, but their light seemed pale and harsh on everyone's faces. "Explain yourself. What exactly is going on here?" Father settled into the main sofa, his voice containing barely controlled anger. He wouldn't even look directly at Victoria. Victoria remained in shock over Alexander's departure. Only when Father's cane struck the floor heavily did she start and return to the present moment. "Dad, she began timidly, tears starting to flow again. "I really was sick. I was afraid you would worry, so I—" "Sick?" Mother laughed coldly, pulling a stack of photographs from her Hermes handbag and throwing them onto the coffee table in front of Victoria. The photos scattered across the surface. Each one showed Victoria in intimate poses with a young man in various European locations. They were kissing on the beaches of Nice, embracing beneath the Eiffel Tower in Paris, laughing radiantly at a café in the Swiss Alps. In these photographs, Victoria appeared healthy and vibrant, showing no signs whatsoever of dying from any blood disease. I recognized the man. David Chen, the struggling Chinese-American artist, the typical Brooklyn hipster type who had been Victoria's so-called true love. Victoria's face became deathly pale, whiter than any performance she had given earlier. How do you have these?" She stared at our parents in terror, as though seeing ghosts. "Did you think your actions were flawless?" Father's voice was ice cold. "I knew you had run away with that poor artist from the very first day. I preserved your dignity for 4 years, publicly claiming you had died of illness, hoping you would mature enough to return and admit your mistakes. But what did you do? Father stood abruptly, pointing accusingly at her. You dared to pull this stunt on an occasion like tonight. Where is the Morrison family's dignity? Where is my and your mother's honor? Victoria cowered under the verbal assault, trembling and sobbing uncontrollably. I didn't mean to. David and I have already broken up. I genuinely came back for Alex. She attempted one last defense. Looking for Alexander? Mother laughed bitterly. What right do you have to seek out Alexander? Do you know how long that young man suffered from depression after your supposed death? Do you know how much effort Kate invested to maintain our partnership with the Sterling family? Now you just waltz back in, thinking a simple, "I'm back," erases everything? Victoria, do you think the entire world revolves around you? I stood to the side, coldly observing this family drama. These photographs had been taken by private investigators I had hired, and I had been the one to inform my parents that Victoria was still alive. I never fought unprepared battles. From the moment Victoria left me that gloating secret letter, I knew she would eventually return. I simply hadn't expected her to be stupid enough to choose today, using such an embarrassing method. Victoria found herself speechless under our parents' criticism, finally realizing this avenue was completely blocked. She turned her last hope toward me. She rushed to me suddenly, grasping my hands while crying. Kate, sister, please help me. Give Alex back to me, please. You've always known how much I love him. We were meant to be together. You were just temporarily substituting for me. Substituting for you. I withdrew my hands, looking at her tearful face with complete irony. Sister, have you forgotten that throughout our childhood, everything you wanted I gave to you? The dresses you liked, the toys you wanted, even when you got into trouble, I was the one who stepped forward to face the consequences for you. But this time, no. I spoke each word clearly, my voice quiet but carrying unshakable determination. Victoria, everything here, including Alexander's fiancé status and Morrison Group's decision-making authority, represents what I've earned through 4 years of my own efforts. None of it was temporarily borrowed from you. You have no right to demand I return anything. My words cut through her like a knife, finally destroying her last illusion. She stared at me stupidly, her expression shifting from pleading to shock to venomous hatred. Catherine Morrison, I never imagined you could be so vicious, she began screaming. You knew all along I wasn't dead. You hoped I would never return so you could steal everything that was mine. You thief! You robber! She lunged at me like a madwoman, trying to strike my face. I had anticipated this and easily sidestepped. She stumbled forward and fell onto the Persian carpet in complete humiliation. Enough! Father finally reached his limit. He pointed toward the door and roared at the butler. Take her to the attic. Without my permission, she is not to step foot outside that room. 2 security guards immediately stepped forward, supporting the still thrashing Victoria between them. Let me go! Release me! Catherine, you witch! May you die horribly! Victoria's curses grew fainter as they carried her away until the attic door slammed shut with finality. The world was finally clean and quiet. Father sank wearily back into the sofa, rubbing his temples. Mother moved to my side and grasped my hand, saying softly, Kate, I'm sorry you had to endure that. I shook my head. Mom, I don't feel wronged. I looked toward Father and said calmly, Dad, first thing tomorrow morning, I'll have the legal department prepare an official statement clarifying tonight's incident. We'll explain that Victoria's mental state has been unstable, which led to this behavior. Additionally, regarding her unauthorized use of family funds to live extravagantly in Europe with that man, perhaps it's time she saw the bill for those expenses. Father looked up at me, surprise in his eyes, but more than that, approval. Very well, we'll proceed as you suggest. He paused, then added, From this day forward, the Morrison family has only one legitimate daughter. You. I felt no emotional disturbance whatsoever, because I knew that from 4 years ago, when I decided to stop living in her shadow, the Morrison family had only ever had one qualified heir, me. Victoria, from the moment she chose so-called love over responsibility, had already become an outsider in our parents' hearts. I had expected Alexander to at least call me with some explanation, or even just a simple greeting. But he didn't. The second day, the third day, for 3 consecutive days, he seemed to have vanished from the earth entirely. No phone calls, no text messages. Gossip about that night's engagement party was already spreading throughout the company like wildfire. Did you hear? Morrison's supposedly dead sister turned out to be Sterling's white moonlight. Really? Doesn't that make Morrison a substitute? Very likely. Sterling hasn't come to the office for 3 days. Word is he's been comforting that young lady. I walked past the coffee room with no expression, and the discussions immediately stopped. I knew what they were thinking. They were all waiting to see my humiliation, waiting to watch this replacement get swept aside by the original. But I didn't care about their opinions. What concerned me was Alexander's attitude. His silence represented wavering. During these 4 years of cooperation, we might not have had the passionate romance Victoria fantasized about, but we had been the perfect business partners, teammates with absolute understanding. I had thought he was sufficiently rational, sufficiently intelligent to distinguish between advantages and disadvantages. But now it seemed I might have overestimated him. The destructive power of a white moonlight sometimes truly exceeded imagination. Friday afternoon, while I was processing urgent documents in my office, Alexander's assistant knocked and entered, looking somewhat awkward. Ms. Morrison, Mr. Sterling. He asked me to collect some of his personal belongings from his office. I looked up at him. Why isn't he coming himself? The assistant's head dropped even lower. Mr. Sterling said, He said he needs some time to think. Think? I set down my pen and stood. I understand. Come with me. I led the assistant into Alexander's adjacent office. Everything here matched the style of my office, calm, restrained, filled with executive authority. The assistant began collecting items, mostly documents and a few changes of clothes. My gaze fell on Alexander's desk. There sat a silver frame containing a photo of Alexander and me together. It had been taken last year when we attended the World Economic Forum in Switzerland. With snow-capped mountains in the background, we both wore business attire, smiling with polite, distant expressions. I walked over and picked up that picture frame. On the back, I felt a small hidden compartment, which I opened. Inside was a yellowed old photograph. The picture showed teenage Alexander and Victoria. Victoria wore a white princess dress and smiled like an innocent angel who knew nothing of the world's complexities. Alexander stood beside her, his eyes filled with the pure adoration of youth. My heart felt as though it had been pricked lightly by a needle, very gently, but painfully. I had always believed that our 4 years of day and night cooperation had completely replaced Victoria's position in his heart. I had thought that even without romantic love, we should have had an unbreakable partnership. It turned out these were all my assumptions. In his heart, I was perhaps truly just a substitute, a replacement who happened to look exactly like his beloved and had stayed by his side during his most painful period. The assistant finished packing and noticed the photograph in my hands, his face paling. Ms. Morrison, It's fine, I said, tucking the old photo back into its hidden compartment and handing him the frame. Take this with you as well. The assistant gratefully took the box and hurried away. The office contained only me. I walked to the huge floor-to-ceiling windows and gazed down at the traffic flowing through the city below. The setting sun stretched my shadow long across the floor. For a moment, I felt unprecedented exhaustion. These 4 years, I had worked like a wound-up machine, desperately working, desperately studying, desperately making myself more excellent and more powerful. I thought that if I performed well enough, everyone would see my value rather than treating me as Victoria's shadow. But in the end, in the heart of the most important person, I remained just a shadow. My phone rang at that moment. It was Alexander. I took a deep breath and answered, "Hello." My voice was calm, revealing no emotion. Silence stretched so long on the other end that I thought he might not speak at all. "Kate," he finally said, his voice hoarse and weary. "I'm sorry." "Sorry for what?" I asked. "These past few days, my mind has been in chaos. Tori, she's been crying terribly. She says these 4 years have been very difficult for her. She says she came back just to see me." My heart sank bit by bit. He had gone to see her after all. No, perhaps from the night of the party he had been with her constantly. "So?" I interrupted his meaningless explanations. "Alexander, what exactly are you trying to say?" He fell silent again. I could imagine his conflicted expression at this moment. On one side, an unforgettable white moonlight. On the other, a fiancé bound by interests. He couldn't bear to give up the former, nor could he afford to lose the latter. "Kate, could you give me a little more time?" he said, almost pleadingly. "Our engagement. Could we postpone it temporarily?" Postpone the engagement. These 4 words struck my heart like a hammer. I knew he had wavered. For the first time, his businessman's calculating brain had been disrupted by emotion. My fingers went white from gripping the phone tightly. I told myself, "Catherine, you cannot cry. You cannot use tears as a weapon like Victoria. That is the behavior of the weak. You must remain calm." "Fine," I said. Alexander seemed to sigh with relief on the other end. "Thank you, Kate. I knew you would—" "But Alexander," I interrupted coldly, "I also have my conditions." "Tell me." "First, postponing the engagement is acceptable, but the Sterling and Morrison Renewable Energy Project must proceed as scheduled. Next month at the Energy Summit in Houston, you must attend as my fiancé. This is a necessary measure for stabilizing stock prices and investor confidence. Second, until you've made your decision, I don't want to see you and Victoria appearing together at any public occasions. I don't care what you do privately, but in public settings, only I, Catherine Morrison, can stand beside Alexander Sterling. You cannot make the Morrison family and me the laughingstock of the entire business community. Third, and most importantly, I paused, speaking each word deliberately, I'm giving you 1 month. After 1 month, if you still haven't made your choice, then I will make it for you. Complete silence followed on the other end. I could feel his shock. He probably expected me to cry, make scenes, and threaten him like an ordinary woman, or humbly beg him not to leave. He never imagined I would negotiate conditions at such a moment, and such cold, uncompromising conditions at that. After a long time, he finally spoke with difficulty. "Kate, must you be like this?" "Yes." I gave him no room for bargaining. Either accept or break up completely right now. And he knew that with Sterling family's massive investment in the renewable energy project, he simply lacked the capital for a complete breakup. In the end, he compromised. "All right, I agree." After hanging up, all strength seemed to drain from my body. I leaned against the floor-to-ceiling window, watching the sky gradually darken outside. Alexander, I had given him 1 month's opportunity. I hoped he wouldn't disappoint me. And I hoped he wouldn't force me to take that final step. Otherwise, what he would lose wouldn't be merely a fiancé. That weekend, for once, I didn't work overtime and returned to the Morrison family estate. As soon as the car entered the courtyard, I heard sharp screaming and the sound of breaking objects coming from the third-floor attic of the main building. The butler hurried to meet me, looking embarrassed. "Miss Catherine, you're home. Miss Victoria. She's having another episode." "Another one?" I raised an eyebrow. "Yes," the butler sighed. "She hasn't been quiet since being locked up. She refuses to eat, cries, and curses all day and has broken everything in the room. The master and madam are so angry they haven't even been staying here these past few days." I nodded in acknowledgement. "Have lunch sent to the attic. I'll go see her." "But Miss Catherine, she's emotionally very unstable right now. I'm afraid she might hurt you." "It's fine," I interrupted the butler and headed upstairs. I was curious to see what new drama my dear sister could create. The attic door was locked, and the security guard respectfully opened it when he saw me approaching. A suffocating, oppressive atmosphere hit me immediately. The room was in complete chaos, with precious Persian carpet covered in porcelain fragments and torn book pages. Bottles and jars from the vanity table lay scattered on the floor, cosmetics and glass shards mixed together in a shocking mess. Victoria sat in the middle of this destruction, wearing a wrinkled nightgown, her hair disheveled, clutching a pillow while staring emptily out the window, muttering to herself. "Alex won't abandon me. He loves me. It's all Catherine, that witch. She stole everything that was mine." Hearing the door open, she whipped around. Seeing me, her empty gaze instantly filled with hatred, like an enraged wild animal. "What are you doing here?" she screamed, grabbing a vase fragment and hurling it at me. I sidestepped easily, and the fragment flew past my cheek to shatter against the wall. "Coming to see you, sister." I walked in front of her, looking down. "You seem to be having a rough time these days?" "Get out! Get out of here!" she shrieked hysterically. I ignored her outburst, calmly pulling over a relatively intact chair to sit down and study her appearance. After just a few days, she had lost considerable weight, with sunken eye sockets and a waxy complexion, bearing no resemblance to her radiant appearance at the party. "Tsk, tsk," I shook my head. "If Alexander saw you looking like this ghost, do you think he would still consider you the pure, flawless white moonlight in his heart?" These words clearly stung her. "You're lying," she protested frantically. "Alex loves me. He's been with me these past few days. He said he would cancel his engagement to you, and then we would get married." "Is that so?" I smiled, taking out my phone and showing her a photograph. The image showed Alexander at an upscale restaurant, laughing and chatting with a middle-aged man, one of the important investors in our renewable energy project. I had taken this photograph myself yesterday evening. Victoria's pupils contracted sharply as she stared at the photo, her lips trembling. "No, impossible. He clearly told me yesterday he was at home handling urgent business." "Urgent business? That's right. For Alexander, a project worth hundreds of billions certainly constitutes urgent business. As for you, sister, you probably don't even qualify as business yet." I put away my phone and said coolly, "Whether I'm lying, you know in your heart. Alexander hasn't visited you for 3 days now, has he?" Victoria's expression froze. Her silence confirmed my guess. Though Alexander had wavered, he wasn't a fool. Having agreed to my conditions, he had to maintain a unified front with me on the surface. He might privately call Victoria, saying ambiguous, comforting things, but he absolutely wouldn't dare truly abandon everything for her sake during this critical moment. This was the real Alexander, a qualified businessman who always put interests first. In this respect, he and I were alike. And Victoria would never understand this. The maid brought lunch at this moment, an elegant four-course meal with soup. I pushed the tray toward Victoria. Eat. Don't starve yourself to death, or people will think I've been abusing you as your sister. Victoria didn't even glance at the food, glaring at me with red eyes. Catherine, what exactly do you want? What do I want? I leaned back in my chair, studying her leisurely. I want you to face reality. First, Alexander is not yours and never was. He belongs to Sterling Group, belongs to those who can bring him profit. You would only become his burden. Second, I make the decisions in this house now. Dad and Mom are completely disappointed in you and won't interfere anymore. Your current food, clothing, and shelter are all paid for by me. So drop that spoiled princess attitude, or I can cut off your support at any time. Third, I'm giving you two choices. I held up two fingers. One, take a sum of money I'll provide and leave this country forever. I'll arrange a new identity for you and guarantee a comfortable life for the rest of your days. Two, continue staying here like a madwoman until you exhaust everyone's patience. Where you end up then, I cannot guarantee. My voice was calm, but I knew every word struck Victoria's heart like a knife. She trembled all over, her face pale as paper. Looking at me, her eyes filled with terror. She probably realized for the first time that I wasn't joking. I truly could determine her destiny. You can't treat me this way. I'm your sister. She made one last struggle. Sister? I laughed coldly. When you came back wanting to steal everything from me after I spent 4 years cleaning up your mess, you stopped being my sister. I stood, no longer looking at her. The food is here. Whether you eat is up to you. My patience is limited. I hope you'll think clearly soon. I turned and left the attic, Victoria's breakdown echoing behind me. I didn't look back. When dealing with people like Victoria, sympathy and pity were utterly useless. You had to be more ruthless, more absolute than they were to make them completely understand reality. She thought her trump card of love made her invincible. I would show her just how pathetic that love was in the face of absolute power and money. The month passed quickly. During this time, Alexander kept his promise, making no more private visits to Victoria and punctually attending the renewable energy project launch in Houston. At the launch event, he stood beside me, cooperatively playing the role of loving fiancé. Facing media cameras, he held my waist and announced our wedding would take place next month. The news immediately boosted both Sterling and Morrison stock prices, and those rumors about replacement drama collapsed entirely. Everything seemed to return to normal, only I knew this was merely the calm before the storm. Alexander was performing, and so was I. We were both waiting for the month's deadline to arrive, waiting for the other to show their hand first. That day, while I was handling company affairs, my private investigator called. Miss Morrison, I have results on what you asked me to investigate. Go ahead. Miss Victoria wasn't alone and suffering from illness abroad these past 4 years, as she claimed. She lived with that painter David Chen the entire time, and they have a child together. My grip on the phone tightened suddenly. A child? Yes, a 3-year-old boy. After David broke up with Miss Victoria, he's been raising the child alone in difficult circumstances. Recently, he seems to have encountered some trouble, owing a large sum of money and desperately trying to raise funds. I hung up and leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes. Victoria, you've truly given me an enormous surprise. She hadn't just deceived our family and Alexander, she had even concealed having a child. What exactly was she planning? Abandon the poor painter and burden of a son, return to resume being the high and mighty Morrison family eldest daughter, marry Alexander, and reach the pinnacle of her life. Did she think everyone was a fool? I immediately had the investigator send David's contact information and address. At the same time, I made a decision. It was time to show Alexander exactly what his precious white moonlight truly was. I arranged to meet Alexander at a private club we frequented. When he arrived, he looked somewhat tired, but otherwise in good spirits. "Kate, what did you want to discuss?" He sat across from me and poured himself whiskey. "Tomorrow is the deadline we agreed upon." I got straight to the point. His hand holding the glass paused momentarily, then he smiled bitterly. "You really won't give me any extra time." "Time enough has been given." I looked at him. "Alexander, I need a clear answer. Will you end this farce, or shall I?" He fell silent, downing his drink in one gulp. He seemed to struggle with his words. "Kate, I've thought a lot this month. I have guilt toward Tori, reluctance to let go. After all, she represented all my youthful affection. But toward you—" He looked at me, his expression complex. "I have gratitude, admiration, habit. We're the most compatible partners. I know only you can stand beside me and accompany me to the highest levels. But I can't tell if this is love or not." "Love?" I laughed. "Alexander, people like us talking about love is too luxurious. What we need isn't love, but value. The value I can bring you, Victoria cannot. You should understand this principle better than I do." "I understand." He nodded, pouring another drink. "But Tori is very pitiful. She says if I don't want her, she won't be able to live—" The same rhetoric again. I was truly tired of hearing it. "Pitiful?" I pulled an envelope from my bag and pushed it toward him. "Look at this first, then decide whether she's truly pitiful." Alexander looked at me questioningly and opened the envelope. Inside were intimate photos of Victoria and David, and a photograph of a 3-year-old boy. The child's features bore a strong resemblance to Victoria. Alexander's face drained of color visibly. He picked up the child's photo with trembling fingers. "Who? Who is this?" "David Chen, Victoria's first love, the man she was willing to fake her death and elope with. As for this child," I paused, speaking each word deliberately, "he's her and David's son, 3 years old." Something seemed to explode in Alexander's mind. He stared at those photos with eyes that shifted from shock to anger, finally becoming deathly silent. The white moonlight in his heart had been completely shattered. What he thought was sacrifice for love was nothing but thorough betrayal and deception. What he considered a pure angel had already borne another man's child. And he, Alexander Sterling, heir to Sterling Group, had spent an entire month agonizing and suffering for such a woman, even willing to harm both families' interests. He had become a complete joke. How dare she?" Alexander's voice seemed to squeeze from between his teeth, his hands crumpling the photos beyond recognition. "Of course she dared," I looked at him calmly. "Because she knew you were nostalgic, knew you were soft-hearted. She was confident that as long as she returned crying and making scenes, you would change your mind. As for that child, he was just a burden she needed to abandon before marrying into a wealthy family." Alexander said nothing, just looking at those photos over and over, as though he would continue until the end of time. I gave him adequate time to digest this cruel truth. After a long while, he finally looked up, his reddened eyes filled with humiliation and regret. "Kate, Now, do you still want to postpone our wedding for her sake?" I asked. He stood abruptly, throwing those photos violently onto the table. "No need," he said through gritted teeth. "The wedding will proceed as scheduled. No, it should be moved up. The sooner, the better." He probably wanted to use a grand wedding to wash away the shame of this period, to prove to everyone that he wasn't the fool who had been manipulated by a woman. I watched his near-collapse state without feeling any satisfaction. I only felt pathetic. Pathetic for Alexander and pathetic for Victoria. They had both lived in their own romantic fantasies, one playing the devoted knight, the other the distressed princess. Now the dream was over. The knight had discovered the princess had long since run away with the dragon and even had a child, and the princess would soon discover that this knight had no intention of rescuing her anymore. It was time for this farce to reach its final curtain call. And I, Catherine Morrison, would be the only winner in this entire charade.